This breaking news update. President Donald Trump is about to speak regarding this morning's U.S. military strike against Venezuela. That mission was carried out by the Army's Delta Force. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was captured along with his wife. We're going to join now our Fox News coverage.
They have what's called a SCIF intelligence room where they can set up screens to see exactly what's happening real time. He said he watched as those forces essentially had Nicolas Maduro and his wife running into a safe room. They didn't get there before they were captured. This is a big moment in which we will hear from the president, the Secretary of War, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the Secretary of State, and dealing with the political controversy of whether there is going to be a force on the ground or what the role of the U.S. will be in Venezuela.
That's right. And the president also said that the U.S. sort of ran drills and created basically a practice model for how this would be carried out. And he praised the actions of U.S. forces in being able to do this with precision and very quickly. And we will expect to hear full details from him and from Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, both of whom have been speaking to congressional leaders this morning. And we had heard from the other side of the aisle some consternation that this operation happened without congressional approval. But the statements that we've been getting from Republican leadership framed this more as an extradition than a military operation that was aimed at regime change. You heard statements of praise from Senate Majority Leader John Thune and also House Speaker Mike Johnson. Both of them said that they were awaiting further details that they could share with members of Congress and that there were going to be briefings when they returned to Washington later on this week. But nothing but praise from congressional leaders for this operation that was carried out, Brett.
Right. The Republicans definitely a lot of praise. Democrats raising questions about the legality of this and whether he had the ability to do it. Under Article 2, a lot of legal experts look at this saying he does. It's actually the 37th anniversary of the effort to get Manuel Noriega in Panama, a similar situation where he faced charges in Miami and eventually went to jail for 40 years. You know, we are seeing reactions from Venezuelans in Florida, in other places, saying that this is a moment in which they feel was a long time coming. The opposition leader, Marina Machado, saying this is a moment for freedom. And the question is how they get to that from the remnants of the regime that are still on the ground in Caracas.
That's right. And the president noted that many of Maduro's allies have turned on him since his capture, and that President Trump does not believe that whatever remnants of his government remain will pose much of a problem. However, this is a regime that has allowed terrorism, drug trafficking to permeate this entire hemisphere. And obviously the U.S. has supported Maria Corina Machado, but what happens next, whether there's a special election called, whether there are forces that are brought in to make sure that that election, if it were to happen, would be legitimate and not interfered with. These are all questions that are going to be difficult to unwind and will potentially take some time. And so what happens in the interim? And does a ground force go in and keep peace? You know, in a power vacuum, a lot of things can happen. And so I think the president will get some questions about that this morning and what the U.S. intends to do to protect stability in the country.
Just to give some perspective on this day, January 3rd, I mentioned Noriega. That was, believe it or not, January 3rd, he turned himself in from the embassy, the Vatican embassy inside Panama. He turned himself over to the U.S. The operation started on December 20th, 1989. Also on this day, January 3rd, was the strike on Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general of the Revolutionary Guard, taken out by U.S. forces in the first Trump administration. So this day has some significance for foreign policy action for President Trump. He's talked about his doctrine, Jackie, as being something that was targeted, specific. He praises the U.S. military. Obviously, this joint force, Delta Force, combination of different U.S. Special Ops mission forces. was very, very specific and very targeted, and he praises that. But his doctrine as far as what it means big picture in the world is really something that people are digesting.
They are, and I think it will also be something that his messaging will be very important to the part of his base that is concerned about getting embroiled in foreign wars. You know, the president has defended his plans here, saying that these are American lives that need to be protected, and he's pointed to the numbers, the amount of drugs that have come into the U.S. since the U.S. put 15% or whatever it was of its Navy, deployed military into the region some time ago, and just the impact that that had on the flow of drugs into the country and the lives that were being saved. I also think, though, that the president has made clear that he does not intend for this to be a long-term involvement on the part of the U.S., that this was less about effectuating regime change, although that may be a consequence of this capture, but it was truly about removing a bad actor who has been indicted in a court of law, and that indictment dating back to the previous administration. And so his critics on the Democrat side of the aisle, who may point to questions of legality, they can hold up that indictment and say that there is a legal justification for this action. How it was carried out and sort of the scale to which it was conducted, I think the president is going to give us more details on why it went down that way, and what President Maduro did not agree to that forced the U.S. to take this action of this scale.
Jackie Heinrich live on the North Lawn. Jackie, thanks. We have been given the 2-minute warning. It's actually drawing out a little bit longer than that. Fox News national correspondent Brian Yennis has been following this very closely. The biggest question, Brian, that we've been asking, you've been dealing with it with guests earlier on the air, what happens next in Venezuela? The next step, getting from point A to point B, is really the tough one. It's the harder part.
It is the harder part. And Maria Corina Machado, who obviously won the Nobel Peace Prize for being the voice, the face of the opposition, released that statement. And she has called for the immediate assumption. She says that immediately that they must do a constitutional mandate, and that Edmundo Gonzalez, who ran for president because she was barred from doing so, must immediately be put in as the commander-in-chief of the National Armed Forces by all the officers and soldiers who comprise it. She also has a message to Venezuelans abroad. She's urging all Venezuelans to, quote, be mobilized with engaging governments and citizens around the world. And in a statement, she also is telling Venezuelans within the country to, quote, be ready to implement what we'll soon communicate to you through our official channels. So while we wait to see what the president is going to say, clearly Maria Corina Machado releasing this statement to mobilize Venezuelans in the country and around the world. You saw those images in Miami, in Doral, Florida. That is the center of Venezuelan life in the United States. There is hope, there's optimism, but we have seen in the past when there have been operations, potential coups and whatnot, that this is the hard part, that it never really came to fruition, and there was just too much infighting, and the military, for instance, just did not turn their backs on Maduro. But this is a completely different situation this morning, obviously, Brett, with Maduro and his wife no longer in the picture, Brett.
Yeah, Brian, just the raid itself, getting to Maduro and his wife, we were told by the president in that interview on Fox and Friends that it was very well protected. The facility had steel doors. We are being told by intelligence sources, our Lucas Tomlinson, is that the couple was asleep at first and then tried to run to a safe room with a giant steel door, at which the president said they were dragged away. The question now is what it means for the region as well. If you think about Cuba, for example, Venezuela, many experts talked about Venezuela as Cuba on steroids. Cuba gets its lifeblood, its oil, its energy from Venezuela. And now in the wake of this, you wonder what that means for Cuba and for the rest of the region.
No doubt about it. When we spoke to Carlos Jimenez last hour, who's the Republican from Miami, he talked about Cuba, Nicaragua, but also the importance of Colombia. We know that the Colombian government has sent troops to the border between Venezuela and Colombia. And why that's important is because at the center of this now indictment against President Maduro and his wife is drugs, narco-terrorism. And we know from a previous indictment in 2020 of President Maduro filed here in New York City that cocaine was at the center of the power of Maduro's regime. And so there's going to be a lot of focus on that region because ultimately in that indictment in 2020, it was alleged that Maduro was working with FARC leaders from Colombia, was using all of Venezuela's military might and airplanes and flights to essentially to send out drugs all around the world. And so there's going to be a lot of attention, I think, in Latin America, what happens in Cuba, Nicaragua, how Colombia responds to this. Will there be some sort of mass exodus? Is there going to be some sort of, perhaps, I mean, hopefully not, but some armed sort of conflict in the streets of Caracas? I think in the immediacy, that is what we'll be looking at here. And you did mention his wife, Brett. Celia Flores is fascinating in that he always used to talk about her as the first fighter of Venezuela. She used to be the defense attorney for President Hugo Chavez, who obviously led socialism in that country and handpicked Maduro to replace him. And so she is actually somebody in the indictment that was filed in 2020 had firsthand knowledge of cocaine. She had two nephews who were arrested for smuggling 800 kilograms of cocaine. That was brought up by prosecutors in the United States. So when you're talking about going after Nicolas Maduro in court, having his wife there with a direct connection to drugs is going to be something that's going to be very much in play here. And as the world now gets to know more about Celia Flores, who is credited, by the way, for keeping him in power down there as well.
And that will all play out, we assume, as this prosecution moves forward. And it could be a number of days, and they will be at the U.S. Southern District of New York. Brian, stand by in New York for more now. We're joined by Rick De La Torre. He is a former CIA Caracas chief of station. As we wait live, Rick, good morning. We're looking live at Mar-a-Lago in the tea room, expecting the president, the Secretary of War, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the Secretary of State to come any moment. With your expertise, you know, this has been a long time coming for Venezuelans who we've seen images already online of the celebrations on the streets, some of the Maduro posters being pulled down off of buildings. We've seen some of that anecdotally already. Obviously, you're seeing celebration in the streets of Miami and Venezuelan corridors. But you look at Venezuela, the poverty, the hyperinflation, the mass immigration. It's been cozy with our adversaries for a very long time. Drug economy, the defiance. This indictment is very detailed. What is your take today in the wake of this?
Well, obviously, it's a great day. It's a great day, not just in Venezuela, in the hemisphere and worldwide, really. What we're seeing now is hopefully the return to democracy in Venezuela. This has always been a house of cards being held by, by Maduro, running a criminal network, a mafia that he personally benefited from, and those within his immediate inner circle. And now we're hopefully going back now to a true democratic and free Venezuela. And you're seeing that on the streets there. You're seeing that in Miami. You're going to see it wherever the diaspora, the Venezuelan diaspora, is located. Luckily, we're talking about a country that remembers what democracy and capitalism was before its downfall under Chavez and going into Maduro. Luckily, there's a strong Venezuelan American community with capital and with interests of returning to their home country and reestablishing themselves and bringing it in line with the rest of the world. It's a great day. It's a great day for everyone involved.
There are questions, and likely we're going to see them in this news conference in a matter of moments. And again, we're waiting for the president to come out of Mar-a-Lago. questions about next steps and how you get from this point to a government that runs Venezuela. Is it the opposition leader, Machado? Is it someone else?
It should be. It certainly should be the opposition leader. The people of Venezuela, they voted. She won that election. Keep in mind, they tried to keep her off the ballot as best as they could, so she ran as vice president, and they still voted for her anyway. And she won that election fair and square, and she is the rightful leader. Her party and her are the rightful leaders of Venezuela. Unlike some of the commentary about maybe Delcy Rodriguez being the vice president of Venezuela, she's someone who's never been on a ballot. She was specifically appointed by Maduro to run and help him run the criminal enterprise. My understanding is she fled the country now. She's in Moscow, which is no surprise to me. In my opinion, she's always been a puppet, an intelligence agent of the Russians, and in particular the Cuban intelligence apparatus. And over the last few years, she's been taking on more and more of the authoritarianism and running the regime with Maduro. So I don't think she's a viable option in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and so is there a sense that the other elements of the regime kind of fall away? There's not a profile of courage here as far as underneath Maduro stepping up and continuing this Maduro regime, is there?
No, that's correct. Over the last decade or so, he's done a really good job of thinning the ranks of anyone who could even possibly be considered disloyal in any way, shape, or form. If you look at his inner circle, they all got blood stains on their hands because they all benefited from the drug trade, from the human trafficking, from the stealing of Venezuelan resources and selling it to the highest bidder. Those are folks that unfortunately have to be dealt with in some way. A lot of folks, I always wondered what would be the off-ramp, what would be the exit strategy here. And many argued that, Maduro would leave and on his own free will and maybe settle up somewhere else. I never really believed that because his own criminal enterprise, his own bosses in his group wouldn't let him leave. Why would they let him leave? He gets the get out of jail free card, but then they're left behind having to face the Department of Justice or the Department of War. That's not a viable option for them either. So I suspect this is just the first chapter in the, in persecuting and arresting or dealing with those within his inner circle, Diosdado, Vladimiro, Delcy, and others. Their day is coming soon.
Rick De La Torre, former CIA station chief in Caracas. Rick, we appreciate it. I want to play this soundbite from President Trump on Fox and Friends this morning, talking about this strike as we look live in Mar-a-Lago. Again, we've been given a few more minutes before this news conference starts with the president and his cabinet. This is the president on Fox and Friends about striking Venezuela and capturing the disputed president, Nicolas Maduro.
Well, we watched it from a room. We had a room, and we watched it, and we watched every aspect of it. We were surrounded by lots of people, including generals, and they knew everything that was happening, and it was very complex, extremely complex, the whole maneuver, the landings, the number of aircraft, which were a massive number, the number of helicopters, a different type of helicopters, different type of fighter jets. We had a fighter jet for every possible situation. And they just broke in, and they broke into places that were not really able to be broke into, steel doors that were put there for just this reason, and they got taken out in a matter of seconds.
That's the president on Fox and Friends as we look live at Mar-a-Lago. Minutes away from that, I want to go quickly now to Doral, Florida. Fox Noticias' Andrea Linares is talking to Venezuelans in that community down there. Andrea, what are you hearing?
That's
That's right, Brett. Good morning. And we have been here all morning speaking to the Venezuelan community. Just to give you an idea, I'm in Doral in South Florida, just standing outside El Arepaso. It's a very famous hotspot, a restaurant where Venezuelans typically gather. They have been chanting, singing all morning long, saying Venezuela Libertad, which means liberty. They're calling this Liberation Day. Some of them just raising their Venezuelan flags, others wearing MAGA hats and taking advantage of this opportunity to thank President Trump and the administrations for their efforts in Venezuela and the region. Now, look, Brett, I am from South Florida. I was born and raised here, been living here my whole life, and I had the opportunity to speak to many in this community. And what's very interesting is we're not just seeing Venezuelans here celebrating. We are also seeing people from other communities. We are seeing Cuban
I'm going to interrupt you, Andrea. Thank you. Thank you. Let's listen in to President Donald J. Trump at Mar-a-Lago, the Winter White House, about the operation overnight.
Late last night and early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II. It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history. And if you think about it, we've done some other good ones, like the attack on Soleimani, the attack on al-Baghdadi, and the obliteration and decimation of the Iran nuclear sites just recently in an operation known as Midnight Hammer, all perfectly executed and done. No nation in the world could achieve what America achieved yesterday, or frankly, in just a short period of time. All Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military, working with U.S. law enforcement, successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. It was dark. The lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. It was dark, and it was deadly. But captured along with his wife, Celia Flores, both of whom now face American justice. Maduro and Flores have been indicted in the Southern District of New York, it's Jay Clayton, for their campaign of deadly narco-terrorism against the United States and its citizens. I want to thank the men and women of our military who achieved such an extraordinary success overnight with breathtaking speed, power, precision, and competence. You rarely see anything like it. You've seen some raids in this country that didn't go so well. They were an embarrassment. If you look back to Afghanistan, or if you look back to the Jimmy Carter days, they were different days. We're a respected country again, maybe like never before. These highly trained warriors, operating in collaboration with U.S. law enforcement, caught them in a very ready position. They were waiting for us. They knew we had many ships out in the sea, just sort of waiting. They knew we were coming. So they were in a ready, what's called a ready position. But they were completely overwhelmed and very quickly incapacitated. If you would have seen what I saw last night, you would have been very impressed. I'm not sure that you'll ever get to see it, but it was an incredible thing to see. Not a single American service member was killed. and not a single piece of American equipment was lost. We had many helicopters, many planes, many people involved in that fight. But think of that, not one piece of military equipment was lost, not one service member was, more importantly, killed. The United States military is the strongest and most fearsome military on the planet by far. With capabilities and skills our enemies can scarcely begin to imagine. We have the best equipment anywhere in the world. There's no equipment like what we have. And you see that even if you just look at the boats. You know, we've knocked out 97% of the drugs coming in by sea. 90%. Each boat kills on average, 25,000 people. We knocked out
making abilities that these
kills on average, 25,000 people. We knocked out 97%. And those drugs mostly come from a place called Venezuela. We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in, and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious because that's what we're all about. We want peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela, and that includes many from Venezuela that are now living in the United States and want to go back to their country. It's their homeland. We can't take a chance that somebody else takes over Venezuela that doesn't have the good of the Venezuelan people in mind. We've had decades of that. We're not going to let that happen. We're there now, and what people don't understand, but they understand as I say this, we're there now, but we're going to stay until such time as the proper transition can take place. So we're going to stay until such time as we're going to run it, essentially, until such time as a proper transition can take place. As everyone knows, the oil business in Venezuela has been a bust, a total bust, for a long period of time. They were pumping almost nothing by comparison to what they could have been pumping and what could have taken place. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. And we are ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so. So we were prepared to do a second wave if we needed to do so. We actually assumed that a second wave would be necessary, but now it's probably not. The first wave, if you'd like to call it that, the first attack was so successful, we probably don't have to do a second, but we're prepared to do a second wave, a much bigger wave, actually. This was pinpoint, but we have a much bigger wave that probably won't have to do. This partnership of Venezuela with the United States of America, a country that everybody wants to be involved with because of what we were able to do and accomplish, will make the people of Venezuela rich, independent, and safe. And it will also make the many, many people from Venezuela that are living in the United States extremely happy. They suffered. They suffered. So much was taken from them. They're not going to suffer anymore. The illegitimate dictator Maduro was the kingpin of a vast criminal network responsible for trafficking colossal amounts of deadly and illicit drugs into the United States. As alleged in the indictment, he personally oversaw the vicious cartel known as Cartel de las Soles, which flooded our nation with lethal poison, responsible for the deaths of countless Americans, the many, many Americans. Hundreds of thousands over the years of Americans died because of him. Maduro and his wife will soon face the full might of American justice and stand trial on American soil. Right now, they're on a ship. They'll be heading to, ultimately, New York. And then a decision will be made, I assume, between New York and Miami or Florida. But we have people where the overwhelming evidence of their crimes will be presented in a court of law. And I've seen it. I've seen what we have. It's both horrible and breathtaking that something like this could have been allowed to take place. For many years after his term as president of Venezuela expired, Maduro remained in power and waged a ceaseless campaign of violence, terror, and subversion against the United States of America, threatening not only our people, but the stability of the entire region. And you all saw it. In addition to trafficking gigantic amounts of illegal drugs that inflicted untold suffering and human destruction all over the country, all over, in particular, the United States, Maduro sent savage and murderous gangs, including the bloodthirsty prison gang, Tren de Aragua, to terrorize American communities nationwide. And he did indeed. They were in Colorado. They took over apartment complexes. They cut the fingers off people if they called police. They were brutal, but they're not so brutal now. And I just have to congratulate our military, Pete and everybody, and our National Guard, because the job that they've done, whether it's in Washington, D.C., where we have a totally safe city, where it was one of the most unsafe cities anywhere in the world, frankly, and now we have no crime in Washington, D.C. We haven't had a killing. We had the terrorist attack a few weeks ago. A little bit of a different kind of a threat. But we haven't had a killing in a long period of time, 6-7 months. We used to have two, on average, 2 a week in Washington, our capital. We don't have that anymore. The restaurants are opening. Everyone's happy. They're going, they're walking their daughters, they're walking their children, their wives. They walk to restaurants. Restaurants are opening all over Washington, D.C. So I want to thank the National Guard. I want to thank our military. And I want to thank law enforcement. It's been amazing. And they should do it with more cities. We're doing it, as you know, and we're doing it in Memphis, Tennessee right now, and crime is down. We've just sort of started a few weeks ago, but crime is down now 77%. And the governor of Louisiana called, great person, and he wanted us to help him, as you know, in a certain very nice part of Louisiana, and we have done that. And it was a rough section, and we have crime down. I understand it's down to almost nothing already after 2.5 weeks. New Orleans, it's down to almost nothing. And we've only been there for 2.5 weeks. Can't imagine why governors wouldn't want us to help. We also helped, as you know, in Chicago, and crime went down a little bit there. We did a very small help because we had no working ability with the governor. The governor was a disaster, and the mayor was a disaster. But it knocked down crime. But we're pulling out of there when they need us. We'll know. You'll know. You'll be writing about it. And likewise, Los Angeles, where we saved Los Angeles early on, where the head of the police department made a statement that if the federal government didn't come in, we would have lost Los Angeles. That's long after the fires. That's when they had the riots in Los Angeles. We did a great job. Got no credit for it whatsoever, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. We don't need the credit. But we'll be pulling out when they need us. They'll call, or we'll go back if we have to. We'll go back. But we did a great job in various cities. But the place that we're very proud of is Washington, D.C., because it's our nation's capital. We took it from being a crime-ridden mess to being one of the safest cities in the country. But the gangs that they sent raped, tortured, and murdered American women and children. They were in all of the cities I mentioned, Tren de Aragua. And they were sent by Maduro to terrorize our people, and now Maduro will never again be able to threaten an American citizen or anybody from Venezuela. There will no longer be threats. For years, I've highlighted the stories of those innocent Americans whose lives were so heartlessly robbed by this Venezuelan terrorist organization. Really one of the worst. One of the worst, they say the worst. Americans like 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungary from Houston. Beautiful Jocelyn Nungary, what happened to her? They, as you know, they kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered by Tren de Aragua animals. They murdered Jocelyn and left her dead under the bridge. There was a bridge that will never be the same to so many people after seeing what happened. As I've said many times, the Maduro regime emptied out their prisons, sent their worst and most violent monsters into the United States to steal American lives. And they came from mental institutions and insane asylums. They came from prisons and jails. The reason I say both, they sound similar. Actually, prisons, a little bit more hostile, a little bit tougher. A mental institution isn't as tough as an insane asylum, but we got them both. They sent from their mental institutions. They sent from their jails, prisons. They were drug dealers. They were drug kingpins. They sent everybody bad into the United States, but no longer. And we have now a border where nobody gets through. In addition, Venezuela unilaterally seized and stole American oil, American assets, and American platforms, costing us billions and billions of dollars. They did this a while ago, but we never had a president that did anything about it. They took all of our property. It was our property. We built it. And we never had a president that decided to do anything about it. Instead, they fought wars that were 10,000 miles away. We built Venezuela oil industry with American talent, drive, and skill, and the socialist regime stole it from us during those previous administrations, and they stole it through force. This constituted one of the largest thefts of American property in the history of our country. Considered the largest theft of property in the history of our country. Massive oil infrastructure was taken like we were babies, and we didn't do anything about it. I would have done something about it. America will never allow foreign powers to rob our people or drive us back into and out of our own hemisphere. That's what they did. Furthermore, under the now deposed dictator Maduro, Venezuela was increasingly hosting foreign adversaries in our region and acquiring menacing offensive weapons that could threaten U.S. interests and lives. And they used those weapons last night. Potentially in league with the cartels operating along our border. All of these actions were in gross violation of the core principles of American foreign policy, dating back more than 2 centuries. And not anymore. All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines. And the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal. But we've superseded it by a lot. By a real lot. They now call it the Monroe Document. I don't know. It's Monroe Doctrine. We sort of forgot about it. It was very important, but we forgot about it. We don't forget about it anymore. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. Won't happen. So just in concluding, for decades, other administrations have neglected or even contributed to these growing security threats in the Western Hemisphere. Under the Trump administration, we are reasserting American power in a very powerful way in our home region. And our home region is very different than it was just a short while ago. The future will be, and we did this in my first term. We had great dominance in my first term, and we have far greater dominance right now. Everyone's coming back to us. The future will be determined by the ability to protect commerce and territory and resources that are core to national security. These are core to our national security. Just like tariffs are, they've made our country rich, and they've made our national security stronger than ever before. But these are the iron laws that have always determined global power. And We're going to keep it that way. We will secure our borders. We will stop the terrorists. We will crash the cartels, and we will defend our citizens against all threats, foreign and domestic. Other presidents may have lacked the courage or whatever to defend America, but I will never allow terrorists and criminals to operate with impunity against the United States. This extremely successful operation should serve as warning to anyone who would threaten American sovereignty or endanger American lives. Very importantly, the embargo on all Venezuelan oil remains in full effect. The American Armada remains poised in position, and the United States retains all military options until United States demands have been fully met and fully satisfied. All political and military figures in Venezuela should understand what happened to Maduro can happen to them, and it will happen to them if they aren't just fair, even to their people. The dictator and terrorist, Maduro, is finally gone in Venezuela. People are free. They're free again. It's been a long time for them, but they're free. America is a safer nation. This morning, it's a prouder nation this morning because it didn't allow this horrible person and this country that was doing very bad things to us. It didn't allow it to happen. And the Western Hemisphere is right now a much safer place to be. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank General Raisin Kane. He's a fantastic man. I've worked with a lot of generals. I worked with some I didn't like. I worked with some I didn't respect. I worked with some that just weren't good. But this guy is fantastic. I watched last night one of the most precise attacks on sovereignty. I mean, it was an attack for justice. And I'm very proud of him, and I'm very proud of our Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, who I'm going to ask to say a few words. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, can you explain how the U.S. will run Venezuela?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Finally, a commander-in-chief the world respects and the American people deserve. And as the president said,
for his home loss to the running to President Donald Trump live from Mar-a-Lago, recapping a military strike earlier this morning in Venezuela. Our coverage of the president's remarks will continue on Fox Chicago and on Fox Local. On TV here on Fox 32 Chicago, we're now going to return you to your normal programming, which is college basketball. We'll have much more on that story as you follow us on Fox Local. And now that you are rejoining us here on Fox Local, I just want to give you a recap of what happened earlier this morning. U.S. Delta forces conducted a large-scale strike against Venezuela, capturing President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. Reports say at least there were about 7 explosions and low-flying aircraft that could be heard around 2 a.m. in the city of Caracas. That strike came as the Trump administration continued to put pressure on Maduro, who's been charged with narco-terrorism here in the United States. We just heard from President Trump, who gave a recap of this assault that happened earlier this morning. He said the air, land, and sea was used to assault Venezuela to bring President Maduro out of a military fortress that was in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela. Celia Flores, the wife of President Maduro, was also captured in that attack. President Trump said that he knew that they were coming, but that they were overwhelmed completely by U.S. military forces. President Trump says that Maduro is currently now on a ship and will ultimately end up in New York City. The president also confirmed that there were no U.S. military casualties in the strike that happened this morning. President Trump says in the meantime that the United States will run the country until a safe, proper, and judicious transfer of power is able to take place. Again, now that President Maduro has been removed from Venezuela, President Trump says it is the United States that will run the country in the meantime. President Trump also said in his statement from Mar-a-Lago earlier this hour, he said the U.S. oil companies will also head into Venezuela, will do the oil infrastructure there to start producing money for the country. And he said that this will make the people of Venezuela, quote, very rich and safe, and that this will make the people of Venezuela here in the United States very happy. We're now going to be joined by Professor for more coverage on this event. Do we have the professor, guys? All right, we do have him this afternoon. We're joined by Professor Paul Post from the University of Chicago. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
First, I want to start with just what are your initial thoughts and reaction to what you just heard from President Trump?
Well, I thought President Trump, the couple of things that were very interesting about it. Obviously, he noted the nature of the operation and comparing it to previous operations, especially referencing all the way back to Jimmy Carter and, of course, the attempt to try to rescue hostages from Iran that was indeed a failure. He, of course, also likened it to other successful operations that he had authorized. And, of course, for me, thinking about the nature of the operation, the one that comes closest is thinking about the Osama bin Laden raid that, of course, happened under the Obama administration. So I thought that that was very notable. And it probably tells us a lot, excuse me, about what the raid itself looked like, even though the president, of course, acknowledged that we'll probably never actually ever be able to see the footage of the raid. And the second thing that, of course, stood out, I think will probably stand out for a lot of people, was that the president emphasized that the U.S. is going to be running the country. And I think that it both makes sense in a way because, of course, right now it's a time of flux. There is no one who's actually in charge right now. But I think it's also going to be a point of concern that's going to raise a lot of questions for how long is this going to be happening? What is going to be the procedure for transferring power over to, say, the opposition leader? Those are going to be big questions that need to be answered. So those are the two big takeaways that I have from the news conference.
I also want to ask you, under international law, is it actually legal for a country to go in and capture another country's sitting president?
The short answer is no. Under international law, the key criteria is, according to the UN Charter, is that it has to be something carried out for self-defense, for military purposes. And it's questionable about whether there was actually a military component to being able to carry out this operation. Having said that, it is not unprecedented for the United States to carry out operations like this where the military element to it is questionable. The most notable example being going back to 1989, 1990 with the capture of Manuel Noriega in Panama. That was, of course, a very similar operation, an operation that took a much longer to be able to carry out, but was indeed executed, and then eventually he was brought to the United States to be able to then be held for justice in U.S. courts. The entire time, it was very questionable about how much that was legal under an international law, but nevertheless, the U.S. carried out that operation.
So what President Justice said for future U.S. involvement in other regime changes around the world?
Well, this is something that I think on the one hand, you would say this is very concerning in that it shows that the U.S. would have a precedent for being able to use covert operations, special forces to be able to remove a leader from power. Having said that, I do think there's a few important pieces of context here. First one is that Maduro was not somebody who had many friends in the world. China was a friend, Russia was a friend, but there was a lot of countries in the region who, and I think a lot of leaders in the region, who are going to be actually quite happy that he's not in power anymore. Of course, the other element to it is that related, the U.S. never recognized Maduro as the leader of Venezuela. And that would be an important part of precedent that I think the Trump administration itself is even going to be using to justify why it can prosecute Maduro in U.S. courts, because it'll say that we never recognized him as the leader of Venezuela. Therefore, ideas of like diplomatic immunity that the U.S. would give to a foreign leader, that wouldn't apply in this case. So I think that there are reasons to be concerned that the U.S. has shown the ability to do this, but there are also reasons to say that there are unique circumstances around Maduro that wouldn't apply in other contexts.
And President Trump said that there were no U.S. military casualties in this attack. And he also says that the U.S. will now, quote, run the country until a safe, proper, and judicious transfer can take place. Do we have any idea exactly a timeline here or exactly what that will look like now that the U.S., according to President Trump, will now be in control of Venezuela?
Well, as I was highlighting before, I think you're putting your finger on exactly the right question, and the question I think many people are going to have, including people who would be supporters of President Trump and even supporters of this operation. They would say, it's great that you were able to carry this out. It's great that Maduro is gone, but what comes next and how quickly will that come about? Especially when you think about this in terms of supporters of President Trump. One of the big things that President Trump has campaigned on consistently, even going back to 2016, was the idea that he would not get the U.S. involved in operations like the Iraq War. Now, so far, this has not looked like that at all. As I said, this looks much more like Panama in 1989. But the thing that people become concerned about is, does the U.S. become involved in nation building? That is something that a lot of people do not want to see the U.S. become involved in with Iraq because of the precedent of Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I think most people would like to see the transition be quite short. And I think that it's possible for it to be short because there is actual logical opposition to be able to hand power over to, but it's going to be a question of actually implementing it and seeing how quickly that can happen.
All right. Professor Paul Post from the University of Chicago, thanks so much for your time this afternoon or this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Time is now 11:09. Just want to recap what we've been hearing from President Donald Trump, who just delivered some remarks from Mar-a-Lago explaining what happened earlier this morning in Venezuela, where President Maduro was captured in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, was captured by U.S. forces as well as his wife, Celia Flores. President Trump said that the two knew that they were coming, but they were completely overwhelmed by U.S. military forces. President Trump says that Maduro and his wife are currently on a ship that will ultimately end up in New York City. President Trump also confirmed that there were no U.S. military casualties in the attack, and he praised their efforts in the way that they were able to capture President Maduro. He said that they were inside of a military fortress in Caracas. President also said that the U.S. would now run the country of Venezuela until a safe and proper judicious transfer of power is able to take place. We're now joined by our political reporter, Paris Schutz, who's going to give a little bit more perspective on what this means for the city of Chicago. So, Paris, I want to start with, first, what are your initial thoughts on what the President Trump just said from Mar-a-Lago a few short minutes ago?
Well, I think no one expected the city of Chicago to actually come up in these statements, but I should address what he said about Chicago because he was talking about the military and the National Guard. He claimed that the National Guard was responsible for the drop in crime in Chicago. And we have to correct that. That's not true because the National Guard was never actually deployed in Chicago. We suspect for maybe a day or two, there were a few National Guards members deployed in suburban Broadview near the ICE facility, but then they were stationed near Joliet awaiting the outcome of these court cases. And then when SCOTUS ruled against the president, they were sent back home. So empirically, they had nothing to do with crime falling in Chicago. That's just an inaccurate statement from the president. I can also tell you what, the reaction to the Venezuela action, the Maduro action is getting in Illinois. I mean, a range of reactions from Democratic lawmakers here. Senator Tammy Duckworth, very, very harshly critical of it, very clear in her mind that the president needed approval from Congress to launch some kind of incursion onto the ground of Venezuela. Let's see if I can find her tweet here in her statement, basically saying, quote, no president has the authority to unilaterally decide to use force to topple a government thrusting the region into uncertainty. On the other end, you have Congressman Brad Schneider taking a more wait-and-see approach, saying President Trump owes the American people clear and convincing evidence that Maduro and the Venezuelan regime pose an imminent threat. Because, Brian, the question right now that nobody can answer, nobody can answer what's going to come next. There are so many parallels in history in terms of the United States leading regime change in another country, and most of those situations lead to war, lead to civil strife, lead to a quagmire. Let's bring up Iraq. Let's talk about Syria. And but then, you've also got Panama in 1989, which historians will argue did not lead to the same kind of quagmire Iraq did. So there is examples of regime change, if done in a targeted fashion, doesn't have to lead to prolonged, strife, but we just don't know. I mean, I also go back to just remembering history to the 1950s in Iran. And the president brings up oil as a major justification here. He claims that Venezuela stole oil operations from the United States, companies that had gone in there. Although that's not an accurate statement either, in that international law makes it clear that natural resources are controlled by the sovereign, by the country. In Iran in the 1950s, Mossadegh, the democratically elected president there, had nationalized the oil fields that British companies had run, and so Britain, with the help of the United States, launched an overthrow of the Mossadegh regime, and now 70 plus years later, that country's never been the same. So there's a range of how regime change goes in different countries, and we just don't know what the future is for Venezuela. There's a lot of tea leaves. Experts in the region will say, Maduro was very unpopular and had led to so much civil strife and economic collapse following Chavez down there. So we can look to the tea leaves to see how this might go, but we just don't know. And the president made clear, we're going to run Venezuela. The United States is going to run. Those are very stark comments, especially from a president who said, no more foreign wars, no more dumb wars, America first. And so you already see reaction from some of the hardcore MAGA right, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying, quote, boy, were we lied to. So that's going to be interesting to see. The folks like Massey in Kentucky and Marjorie Taylor Greene, some of these folks that were the true believers on America first, meaning more isolationism, but you can see foreign policy clearly is dominating Trump's second term here. So many fronts in foreign policy that the president is focused on, and now running another country, the direct opposite of what he campaigned on, the direct opposite of what MAGA, the platform, had been about in terms of isolationism. Now, the messaging strategy is to claim it's protecting Americans because of the drug trafficking that happens. Although, again, experts in that part of the world will remind that the fentanyl's not coming from Venezuela, it's coming from China through Mexico. In fact, there are very few drugs at all come to the mainland of the United States from Venezuela. It's mostly Colombia, Mexico, China. And Marjorie Taylor Greene also brought up the notion that if the president's justification is protecting Americans from drugs, then why did he pardon a major drug trafficking kingpin, and that's the former president of Honduras, just a month ago? So very different justifications, but the president not hiding oil as a major justification here. And so we're launched into a period of uncertainty now.
And Paris, we did receive word that there is going to be a protest here in Chicago around 5 p.m. local time today to protest this attack on Venezuela. So what do you think that all of this means for Chicago's Venezuelan population and even just broader Latino communities who are watching all of this unfold?
Yeah, well, the Venezuelan population makes up the majority of the most recent migrant arrivals, especially considering the fact that many of them came on a bus at the direction of and the organization of Texas Governor Greg Abbott. And that whole operation was kind of a way, to move Venezuelan migrants out of Texas, out of border communities, but also to kind of stick it to quote unquote sanctuaries. So just say, hey, you got these sanctuary laws. Let's see if you can actually deal with it. And the Chicago region really had some hiccups, but really had to come together, and the state and the county to make this work with all tens of thousands of newer Venezuelan arrivals. So long story short, no doubt they're going to be very interested in what's happening. And by and large, they fled because of economic or other persecution reasons at the hands of the current regime, Maduro. So one would think that they have no love lost for Maduro. But the counterpoint to that is if the president wants to curb the flow of immigration and migration, whether it's illegal or legal or asylum seeking into the United States, there is the option that this could have the opposite effect in terms of causing instability and more folks needing to flee and making that perilous journey through the Darien Gap in Panama, Colombia, and up through Central America to the border. Will this cause more migration from Venezuela? The president saying again, the very extraordinary statement that the United States is going to run Venezuela. The United States is now nation building and running another country. So in his mind, perhaps that if the United States can run it successfully, it would curb that kind of migration to Chicago and other cities. But yeah, these groups that are going to protest at 5, Brian, tended to be more ideologically far left anti-war groups. So I didn't see Venezuelan groups in that mix, maybe some immigration groups. So it's too early to get a gauge on how does the Venezuelan community, the expat community feel at large. We know many of them have no love lost for Maduro, but do they fear a more destabilized country? And does anybody want a country run by another country? You know, the sovereignty of a country now, for the time being, gone. And so that's going to be what we're going to have to watch.
All right, that is our Paris Schutz, our Chicago political reporter. Given this Chicago perspective on this U.S. attack on Venezuela, as well as the capture of President Nicolas Maduro. Thanks again for your time, Paris.
All right, thanks, Brian.
All right, we're now going to return you to Mar-a-Lago, where President Trump is currently taking questions. Let's listen in.
And she's essentially willing to do what we think is necessary to make Venezuela great again. Very simple.
Mr. President, Colombian President Gustavo Petro, a couple weeks ago, you said he's got to watch his ass. And today he said he's not concerned about anything happening to him in the aftermath of this operation. So just what your message is about that.
Well, he has cocaine mills. He has factories where he makes cocaine. And yeah, I think I stick by my first statement. He's making cocaine. They're sending it into the United States. So he does have to watch his ass.
Mr. President, did you notify any members of Congress in advance?
Marco, do you want to talk about that? Because you were involved in it.
Sure. We called members of Congress immediately after. This was not the kind of mission that you can do congressional notification on. It was a trigger-based mission in which conditions had to be met night after night. We watched and monitored that for a number of days. So it's just simply not the kind of mission you can call people and say, hey, we may do this at some point in the next 15 days. But it's largely a law enforcement function. Remember, at the end of the day, at its core, this was an arrest of 2 indicted fugitives of American justice, and the Department of War supported the Department of Justice in that job. Now, there are broader policy implications here, but it's just not the kind of mission that you can pre-notify because it endangers the mission.
Mr. President, if I can add one thing to that, Congress has a tendency to leak. This would not be good. If they leaked, General, I think it would have been maybe a very different result. But I have to say, they knew we were coming at some point, We had a lot of ships out there. They sort of knew we were coming. We were. But Congress will leak, and we don't want leakers.
Mr. President, you were one of the only people to watch this all play out live. What was Maduro doing when the U.S. forces entered what I assume would be his home? And also, was there any point where the U.S. was considering if Maduro pushed back or resisted killing Maduro?
It could have happened. It could have happened. He was trying to get into a safe place. The safe place is all steel. And he wasn't able to make it to the door because our guys were so fast. They went through the opposition so fast. And there was a lot of opposition. People were wondering, do we get them by surprise? Sort of surprised, but they were waiting for something. It was a lot of opposition. There was a lot of gunfire. You saw some of it today. But he was trying to get to a safe place, which wasn't safe because we would have had the door blown up in about 47 seconds, they say on average, regardless of how thick the steel was. It was a very thick door. It was a very heavy door, but he was unable to get to that door. He made it to the door. He was unable to close it.
So where's Maduro?
Go ahead, finish.
Where is Maduro going to be in the time being right now? Do you know his exact
Well,
whereabouts?
eventually, ultimately, in the near future, he's going to be brought to New York.
And where is he going to be held? Where is he going to be held in New York? Do you know?
That's going to be up to the officials that do these things.
Mr. President, the U.S. has something of a mixed track record of ousting dictators without necessarily a plan for what comes afterwards.
Not with
Did
me,
that
though.
weigh on your decision
Well, that's
making?
when we had different presidents, but with me, that's not true. With me, we've had a perfect track record of winning. We win a lot, and we win. If you look at Soleimani, you look at al-Baghdadi, you look at the Midnight Hammer. Midnight Hammer was incredible. Right now, you wouldn't have peace in the Middle East. We have essentially peace in the Middle East because of that. If we weren't successful with Midnight Hammer, you wouldn't have peace in the Middle East. So, with me, you've had a lot of victory. You've had only victories. You've had no losses. Yeah.
Mr. President, can you? How long do you expect the U.S. to run Venezuela, and how soon do you want the Venezuelan people to hold elections?
So I'd like to do it quickly, but it takes a period of time. You know, we're rebuilding. We have to rebuild their whole infrastructure. The infrastructure is rotted. It's actually very dangerous. It's blow-up territory. Oil is very dangerous. It's a very dangerous thing to take out of the ground. It can kill a lot of people. It has killed a lot of people doing just that. The infrastructure is old. It's rotted. Much of it is stuff that we put there 25 years ago, and we're going to be replacing it. And we're going to take a lot of money out so that we can take care of the country.
Are you saying that Secretary Rubio and
Mr. President, China, Russia, and Iran have interests in Venezuela. How does this operation affect your relationships with them when it comes to the oil and drugs?
In terms of China and Russia, Russia when we get things straightened out. But in terms of other countries that want oil, we're in the oil business. We're going to sell it to them. We're not going to say we're not going to. In other words, we'll be selling oil. Probably in much larger doses because they couldn't produce very much because their infrastructure was so bad. So we'll be selling large amounts of oil to other countries, many of whom are using it now, but I would say many more will come.
Are you saying that, Mr. President, are you saying that?
Oh, Mr. President, thank you. What is your message to the people of Venezuela today? Of course, the civilian population specifically, they have a lot of questions. What is your message to the people of Venezuela?
That you're going to have peace, justice. You're going to have some of the riches that you should have had for a long period of time. It was stolen from you. But you're going to have peace and you're going to have safety. You're going to have justice. You're going to have a country. You're going to have a real country. You're going to have potentially a great country. You know, if you go back 20 years, maybe even a little longer ago, that was a great country. And they destroyed it. Remember I said that if we lose this election, the United States will be Venezuela on steroids. That's what would have happened. Had we lost the election, the 2024 election, we suffered so badly. When you look at the border from 2020, what they did, what Joe Biden administration did to our country should never be forgotten. But if we had to go through another year of that, we wouldn't have. We would be exactly where Venezuela was in terms. I used to say, if they win, we're going to be Venezuela on steroids, and that's what would have happened.
President, thank you. Are you saying that Secretary Hegseth and Rubio are going to be running Venezuela, and will you be sending in U.S. military troops to provide?
They're going to be a team that's working with the people of Venezuela to make sure that we have Venezuela right. Because for us to just leave, who's going to take over? I mean, there is nobody to take over. You have a vice president who's been appointed by Maduro. And right now she's the vice president, and she's, I guess, the president. She was sworn in as president just a little while ago. She had a long conversation with Marco, and she said, we'll do whatever you need. I think she was quite gracious, but she really doesn't have a choice. We're going to have this done right. We're not going to just do this with Maduro, then leave like everybody else, leave and say, let it go to hell. If we just left, it has zero chance of ever coming back. We'll run it properly. We'll run it professionally. We'll have the greatest oil companies in the world go in and invest billions and billions of dollars and take out money, use that money in Venezuela. And the biggest beneficiary are going to be the people of Venezuela. And also, I can't stress this strongly enough, the people that got thrown out of Venezuela that are now in the United States, and frankly, some want to stay and some probably want to go back. Yeah.
So, Mr. President, what is being done to protect Americans in the country, and were any of the detained Americans
Well, right now they're
arrested
very
last
protected
night?
because nobody's going to mess with us. They're very protected. The people of, and we let them know that you better not touch one of them.
Are you concerned that bad elements of the Maduro regime will remain in place?
Well, we know who they are. We're on them, and they're acting much differently now than they would have acted 2 days ago.
And what can you
Okay,
say
wait,
about
behind you, please.
Mr. President, why is running a country in South America America first?
Well, I think it is because we want to surround ourselves with good neighbors. We want to surround ourselves with stability. We want to surround ourselves with energy. We have tremendous energy in that country. It's very important that we protect it. We need that for ourselves. We need that for the world. And we want to make sure we can protect it. Yes, sir. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, is there a message here for Cuba and Diaz-Canel?
Well, Cuba is an interesting case. Cuba is, not doing very well right now. That system has not been a very good one for Cuba. The people there have suffered for many, many years. And I think Cuba is going to be something we'll end up talking about because Cuba is a failing nation right now, very badly failing nation. And we want to help the people. It's very similar in the sense that we want to help the people in Cuba, but we want to also help the people that were forced out of Cuba and living in this country. Do you want to say something about that, Marco, please?
Well, I mean, I just gave you a statement a few minutes ago about, when the president speaks, you should take him seriously. So, suffice it to say, Cuba is a disaster. It's run by incompetent, senile men, and in some cases, not senile, but incompetent nonetheless. It has no economy. It's in total collapse. And by the way, they were, all of the guards that helped protect Maduro, this is well known, their whole spy agency, all that were full of Cubans. I mean, it's amazing. This poor island took over Venezuela in some cases. One of the biggest problems the Venezuelans have is they have to declare independence from Cuba that tried to basically colonize it from a security standpoint. So, yeah, look, if I lived in Havana and I was in the government, I'd be concerned, at least a little bit.
Are you cutting off the oil flow to Cuba from Venezuela?
Well, the president already announced a week ago that anything that's sanctioned, it's sanctioned oil, it's not going to be allowed to get there. So that's an
The answer is yes.
Mr. President,
Is the U.S. aware of the location of opposition leader Machado, and have you been in contact with her?
No, we haven't. No, we haven't.
Mr. President, on Monday.
Oh, I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect.
Mr. President, is it possible that the U.S. ends up administrating Venezuela for years?
Well, it won't cost us anything because the money coming out of the ground is very substantial, so it's not going to cost us anything.
So the U.S. isn't going to dedicate
we will.
money to.
Well, we want safety there. We want to be surrounded by countries that aren't housing all of our enemies all over the world. That's what was happening, and you don't want to have that. But we're going to be rebuilding, and we're not spending money. The oil companies are going to go in. They're going to spend money. We're going to take back the oil that, frankly, we should have taken back a long time ago. A lot of money is coming out of the ground. We're going to get reimbursed for all of that. We're going to get reimbursed for everything that we spend. So it's going to be a very important. This is a very big evening that took place last night. We have to be surrounded by safe, secure countries, and we also have to have energy. Very important. We have to have energy that's real energy, not where they're getting 4% and 5% of the energy out of the ground. You take a look. It was such a disaster. So what's going to happen with Venezuela, I think, over the next period of a year is going to be a great thing, and the people of Venezuela will be the biggest beneficiaries.
Mr. President, on Monday, U.S. military.
Mr. President, thank you. What did you last speak to Maduro about when you spoke? And is the U.S.
Well, I don't want to get
at war
into
with
the
Venezuela?
conversations, but I did have conversations with him, and I said, you got to surrender. And I actually thought he was pretty close to doing so, but now he wished he did, yeah.
Mr. President, can you explain, you said that Maduro is responsible for drug trafficking. You recently pardoned the former president of Honduras who was convicted on many drug trafficking. Can you explain how these two situations are different? And would you ever pardon Maduro?
I endorsed, as you know, the winning president, the man who won in Honduras. I endorsed the man who won in Chile. I endorsed the man who won in Argentina. And we are doing very well with that whole group. The man that I pardoned was, if you could equate it to us, he was treated like the Biden administration treated a man named Trump. That didn't work out too well for them. This was a man who was persecuted very unfairly. He was the head of the country. He was persecuted very unfairly. And there are a number of them. And we felt that it was a very unfair situation that happened to him. He's also a party member of the man who won. So obviously the people liked what I did. And one of the reasons that was done is because of the fact that the party in power felt very strongly that that man was treated very badly. I studied it very quickly, and then I studied it in great detail. I went to a lot of the people standing behind me, and they felt that that man was persecuted and treated very badly. That's why I gave him a pardon.
Mr. President, you referenced boots on the ground earlier. Can you just sort of button this up? Do you envision the U.S. military having a presence in Venezuela as the U.S. runs that country?
No, we're going to have a presence in Venezuela as it pertains to oil, because we have to have, we're sending our expertise in. So you may need something, not very much. But no, we're going to be taking out a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground. And that wealth is going to the people of Venezuela and people from outside of Venezuela that used to be in Venezuela. And it goes also to the United States of America in the form of reimbursement for the damages caused us by that country. So I want to thank you all very much. Thank you. Do you have one? Yes, please. You were so nice before. I'm going to give you the final question. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Mr.
Unless
President.
it's a bad question, in
It's
which
about
case I'll
Putin.
go one word. It's about who?
It's about Putin, if you want.
About Putin. Well,
Okay.
that's always nice.
You had a
to talk
phone.
about Putin.
You had a phone call with him on
Yeah.
Monday. Did he talk at all about Maduro? Did y'all talk about this?
No, we didn't.
And
We
then-
never spoke about Maduro.
Are you mad at him right now? I mean, there's this
I'm not
intelligence.
thrilled with Putin. I'm not thrilled with Putin. He's killing too many people.
There was that
I
intelligence.
thought that would be so. I settled 8 1/4 war. You know what the 1/4 was? Thailand and Cambodia. I did it again. They broke out, and I did it in about 5 hours, and I settled it. I'm giving myself 1/4, so I'm up to now 8 1/4. In other words, I settled the war, but then they broke out. They had a pretty bad breakout over the last 4 days. I got them to go back to peace. So I only give 1/4. I thought the easiest one would be, one of the easier ones would be Russia, Ukraine. It's not. And they both have done some pretty bad things. And look, that's Biden's war. That's not my war. But I want to stop the lives. Did you see where last month, 30,000, it was 27,000 the month before. 30,000, mostly soldiers, were killed this last month. 30,000. I want to stop that. You know, I got NATO to pay 5% instead of the 2% that they weren't paying. They weren't paying 2, now they pay 5. And we send them a lot of munitions. We send them a lot of things, missiles and various other things, a lot. And they pay. The United States is not losing money. We're probably making money on that. It's the last thing I care about. I just want to stop all those people. We're losing 25, 30,000 human beings that come from 2 places that are very far away. But if I can stop, because it's something I've been pretty good at doing, deals, I guess. It's all a deal. Life is a big deal. But if I can stop that war and stop 30,000 young people, in addition to the fact that people are being killed in Kiev, people are being killed in other cities throughout, you know, a much smaller number, but they're being killed, viciously killed. So I'm not happy about it. I thought that would be something that would get solved. We have Mr. Witkoff here. I think that we're making progress, but that's a war that should have never happened. If I were president, it would have never happened. Putin says it. Everybody says it. If I were president, that would have never happened. But I inherited that war. That was Joe Biden, Zelensky, and Putin. I came into the situation, and it's a mess. And I will say this. I watched an operation last night that was so precise, that was so brilliant. I mean, it was incredible. If we had our people, like this general, and our people involved, that war would not have gone on very long, that I can tell you.
You told me
That war, to use an old term, that war has become a bloodbath, and we want it to get stopped. Thank you very much.
And you were just listening to some reaction from President Donald Trump speaking live from Mar-a-Lago. I do want to recap what happened earlier this morning, where U.S. Delta forces conducted a large-scale strike against Venezuela, capturing President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. President Trump says that the two are now heading to New York. They were currently on a ship, but will ultimately end up in New York, where they will face charges for narco-terrorism. President Trump said that there were no U.S. casualties in the strike that happened earlier this morning. And here's an important note. President Trump says that the United States will run Venezuela until a safe, proper, and judicious transfer of power is able to take place. President Trump said that these things sometimes take time, so did not give an exact timeline for exactly how long the United States will be in charge of Venezuela. And he also says that U.S. oil companies will go into Venezuela. They're going to redo the oil infrastructure there and then make sure that that country is able to start producing money via oil. We will continue to have more coverage of this throughout the day here on Fox Local and Fox Chicago.